Thanks, Matt. Yes.
Bueno, parece que hoy puedo hablar de pero bueno, vamos a tener una línea en inglés. Sí. Es posible que puedo para ver todo el mundo la próxima sí, ya acá puede ganar. Perfecto. See some folks I know in the sewer audience. If anybody has any challenges here, please let me know. Either raising your hand or chatting, and I will try and stop walking. And I will try to do. Thank you, Karen. The slide's not sharing.
It's great. Yes.
No, you have the slides in your laptop, not
Yes.
So should go, they will they cannot see you're sharing the slide in your laptop at the JiLAEE.
Pues entonces es necesario que pueda ver el email myself.
But the other alternative is that you also connect to the same meeting in your laptop and then you share from your laptop.
Just then mute myself here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. That'll be faster. Do that.
Do you want me to tell you the idea?
Yeah, so that if I just
It's
go to my
difficult
Yes.
to open the slides
yeah,
Yeah.
main computer instead of using two computers.
Do you think that's better?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So why don't I do that? Why don't I email myself the slides?
Sorry, everybody.
This is exactly right.
This is one of
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'll keep doing this. Yeah.
No. What? Email. Yes. Okay.
You couldn't find the actual machine.
Yeah. Para poner pendrive. Está cerrado el show. Está cerrado ahí adentro.
Pero ¿para qué crees que
¿Podemos usar el pendrive?
A ver.
Pero
pero eso es going to
okay. Okay. Okay, so even
So the fire. And then some snitch like this balance. So yes. It's F, yes. That's one. This is other one. Switch. Let's see. So, particularly, okay.
Bien, sabemos encontrar una solución.
Eso lo pueden
No, sí sabemos.
poner
Y no tiene la-
Bueno, mi pregunta es sí.
Oh, sí.
So
el tema es
which one are you using? U1 or U2? U1, share. Yeah, it's open. Okay. So like that. And here. This is here.
sí.
Okay, but
That's okay.
that's it. Anyway. So so. Yeah, so okay, so
Permiso.
Solo estamos con el
Explicar y pero
that's it.
okay, sí, bueno,
Okay.
Gracias.
Oh, great.
¿Cómo puedo ver a los participantes aquí? Porque hay una manera o no sé. Bueno,
Sí.
oh, no, porque no, ustedes lo pueden ver. Entonces, bueno,
That video.
no, I think I need to minimize that. So I won't be able to see any of this.
So these people seeing the viral stuff.
Yeah, we're going to get started.
Yes.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and start this video. I'll try and minimize this. Okay. Again, thank you for everybody. Thank you for that wonderful welcome. Anybody on Zoom, if you just raise your hand, I suppose if you have trouble hearing me, and I will stop walking around and never project my voice more. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So what I'm presenting today is a design for an experiment that's that we're in the process of putting together. We've actually started building the platform for this experiment.
As Julio mentioned, and again, thank you very much for inviting me down here, Julio, and thank you for your wonderful introduction. I do a lot of work in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the economics of social identity. And in the past several years, I've been doing a lot of work with companies in the US, other large employers in the US, who care about this question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm talking, when I mean diversity, I'm talking about social identity like race and gender, for example. This experiment is a little bit different. So in the past several years, I've been in situations where I've pounced on opportunities to work with companies. They want to get something done, they want to find out answers to some particular question, and I work as fast as I can, either by myself or with a team of people, to design an experiment to address open questions in this area. This is a little bit different than that. In fact, it's quite a bit different than that. This is building it from the ground up. And so this, what I'm presenting here is an experiment the designing in conjunction with Brent Hickman, and also with Business and Law Institute, John List, University of Chicago, and Mandy Callis, Harvard University. This is the first time this design is being presented, and so there's a lot of different moving pieces. I probably will not get through all of this, and I'm very excited about any feedback that anybody can offer, particularly on the more open dimensions. So the overarching question that this project fits under is whether or not workplace diversity can affect firm performance. So for example, how does employee social identity, which I'm going to refer to as SID, go to the slides, affect firm performance? Social identity being gender, race, age, socioeconomic status, any salient identity characteristic that you can think of as society. And in the US, we often think about this in terms of gender and race. I've been talking a lot with folks over the last several weeks here during my visit at JiLAEE or JiLAEE about the extent to which these same social identities are salient or economically relevant in the Argentine context or in other countries of Latin America. But for now, we're going to keep this talk predominantly focused on the US. And so a question that often arises is whether or not employee social identity diversity is beneficial to firms. So is employee SID, social identity diversity, beneficial to firms? Is it harmful to firms? And if so, of course, how? Why should we care? And there are a lot of different reasons that we might care about this. One reason is that firms are already acting, moving. A lot of firms are moving quickly. They're devoting substantial resources to trying to diversify the gender, race, and other demographic characteristics of their employees, right? And so we'd like to know what likely impacts it's going to have on firm performance. Is this a good idea from the perspective of firm profitability? Or there are other reasons. Yes.
So you are assuming that firms are inefficient, so that they are not taking into account that there is a benefit of having the social identity, and basically, or you are testing whether this has an effect or not. So is that they don't realize that they can perform better.
That's right.
So there is an inefficiency. So
That's right. And I'm testing the latter, but I generally tend to not assume that the existing solutions are efficient. In part, and I realize that typically apart from a lot of epistemologically apart from a lot of comments, but because things change over time. And so there are a lot of reasons that you can think about why social identity and diversity might become important work. And then there's a learning process. That's one way I think that I could answer that question.
it could also be that another possibility would be that firms are efficient, but somehow the market is not able to provide what would be good for the firm. This is an alternative or no? It has to be a firm level.
I don't know. I'll have to think about that. Let's come back to that in a moment. So I'm gonna zero in more on these questions of whether or not, so conditional on the fact that a lot of firms are doing this. So this is one way of looking at it. What are the potential effects? Another way to look at this question too would be to flip it around and just take a look at what are the impacts on the employees themselves and think about the welfare implications of that and inequality implications of that. But so let me, okay, yeah, go ahead.
One quick question. Can we find the goal of diversity like a filter in a pool of applicants?
do you mean?
Yeah, because I have a pool of applicants, but like I have to decide one of these. So I think it's actually a restriction.
A quota or something like that.
Yeah, I work.
Sure, I mean, that would be one approach to trying to do things.
If you put a restriction, how can you do better if you put, you're restricting your choice? So, because it's probably that you will do anyway without the quota.
If you know that it is, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you know that it is.
Yeah, but if you I think that logically it cannot be better if you have that choice, your choice.
Logically, it cannot be better if you have no choices.
Yeah.
But it's not obvious that if your manager realizes that diversity is good.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the point, right?
I think it's a fundamental
I
right.
try to see if in a randomized experiment, like I come up with the answer to that to see if I have a more diverse set of people versus not, I produce more, and that will convince the manager whether it is worth to look for more diverse group of people afterwards.
Yeah, let me see if I can tell a story to help with this too. Yeah, I'm assuming that information does not flow perfectly and does not flow simultaneously. Suppose something changes, let's just tell that story, right? Suppose that there's a big movement in a society, which has recently happened in the US, for example, in other parts of the world, where people are thinking a lot more about race, right? And consumers start to care about this. And this affects consumers' preferences over firms that they want to purchase relatively equivalent goods from, right? This could provide a new rationale or a new reason for there being benefits, right? But so so there's a variety. You could also think about changes in education and human capital.
I understand.
Okay, okay.
The quota or not. Right. If you're going to have a restriction or not. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
It's perfectly fine that you have different quotas.
Okay.
Not only like when if you put a restriction, and it's because of the restriction, I don't understand you can do that in any way.
Okay.
If it's a government,
Yeah.
if it's not, you can have a like or more diverse pool of employees. But if you come from a quota, I don't understand how you can do better.
Okay. Well, and to be clear, so there are other, well, maybe this will also help too. There are multiple ways you can think about increasing the diversity of a particular workplace. It doesn't even have to be by quote, it can be by encouragement. You could even have workers of identical skill sets where you have segregated by work setting or segregated by work team, but then you have them integrated by work team. Okay, so there's also just a heated debate about this. The stakes are high. So a lot of people out there claim, so maybe I'll just don't even have a position on this. A lot of people out there claim that employee social identity, diversity, does make firms more successful and profitable, even if they're not doing it. Maybe they're wrong. Right? I'm not going to take a position on that. If so, we'd like to know, because profit maximization supports we have this allocation of resources to expanding employee social identity diversity. Others argue it has no impact on recruitment. Right? Maybe the solution is already efficient. Right? In which case, diversity initiatives may be a waste of resources. Some argue that actually it hurts for performance. I'll talk about a couple of those rationales of that as well. Right? Okay. But so, how does employee social identity affect firm performance? So I guess I was talking already a little bit about the fact that social identity could impact firm performance in several different ways. One way might be via investor preferences, another might be via consumer preferences and reputation of the firm. Right? An additional way that it might matter that has been talked about a little bit more commonly is through impacts on productivity, production costs, and worker behavior. So the relevant questions here are: does the social identity composition of the workplace affect worker productivity and production behaviors among employees? And if it does, in what ways? What are the mechanisms? And what moderators influence the magnitude? So that's coming back to this other question too. It could be that we identify ways that socially diverse teams can be better and worse off, right? By changing the structure of the technologies that we're using. So there are two plausible channels or classes of mechanisms. The first one is what's most talked about. In fact, maybe the only one talked about so far, as I'm still getting more familiar with this literature in this area. But the impact of employee social identity diversity in their interactions with each other, right? So the impact of an employee of SI type A working with another employee of SI type A or versus type B, right? So you can think of this as a woman working with a woman as compared to a woman working with a man. Are there production implications? Does it matter? The other is, however, which has been talked about very little, is the impact of the firm's social identity composition on worker selection. Do different types of workers or job seekers care about the diversity of the workplace? And there is some evidence. There's one paper that I know of that I don't know that well yet, but I forget the authors off the top of my head, but out of Stanford GSB that suggests that workers, certain workers, are at least willing to accept lower wages to work in a socially diverse workplace, a social identity diverse workplace. Right? But so the question is, what types of workers? Are you getting better workers? Are you getting worse workers? Better on some dimensions and worse on some dimensions. So that's one of the main questions that we're going to be exploring here as well. So I think in the interest of getting to the design, I don't want to linger too much on this, other than that there's a literature on this. I'm still digging into this literature. Again, we're at early stages of the experiment. But by and large, what we see is there's some theoretical work that highlights the likely costs of two workers of different identities, for example, different races or different genders interacting with each other, largely from communication frictions. There's also some more recent theoretical work that's highlighted the possibility of benefits to performance in teams through cognitive diversity. If cognitive diversity is correlated with social identity diversity, which is plausible, but there's not a lot of evidence of that I'm aware of. Right? But the notion that as a particular type of person going through the world, you have a different sort of set of perspectives and tools to translate your perspectives into work production. So that this can help groups more quickly solve problems and find better solutions. And Hong and Page even show in several papers that this can outperform a same-size group that's homogeneous in terms of their perspectives and at a higher skill level under certain conditions, actually in the broad sense. Golub and Jackson then also talk about how information may be unevenly distributed across social identity groups. And if that's true, then diverse groups can learn and converge to correct solutions and find best policies faster. So there's some theory out there on this, both on the cost side and the benefit side. The empirical work, there's some work in psychology literature as well as some organizational behavior literature, but there's some psych lab experiments, for example, that show that as you increase the proportion of women that are represented in a group, they perform better in various different types of tasks in the lab. These are psychology labs that I'm paying for them. But we also find in the economics literature, there's also a little bit of evidence, a couple of empirical papers that find, for example, that more gender balanced teams perform better in student business competitions, as well as more ethnicity balanced teams too. There's also some papers in the behavior literature that finds in complex problem solving situations, more women on the team or a greater percentage of women on the team and a greater percentage of diversity on the team can increase the performance of these teams. Now, for the empirical literature so far, it's been predominantly on more complicated problems. And also in the theoretical literature, at least in terms of talking about the benefits. That's going to be important to think about when we think about our setting here. Because we don't have a setting that looks at a complex problem. So it's going to be better suited to examine the costs. Yeah.
So this potential link between diversity and productivity, shouldn't we be worried that it depends on the type of products and services that are being produced? So it's not the same in manufacturing factory or a bank. So it seems from this literature that it's so specific to certain contexts, like business students competition, that it's not obvious how to translate that in general. So
Absolutely. I think that's a good anticipation of what I want to talk about here, right? No, absolutely, absolutely. That's why mechanisms matter, right? That's why at the economist we care about mechanisms. We don't want I mean, if we were the first ever paper to ever look at this question, maybe we would we still care, but we just find it ain't the very first one. So there is some evidence of it. It's thin. So again, I'm being honest about the fact that I'm not a master of this literature yet, but I'm fairly certain that these are the dimensions on which we're contributing. The first two are pretty simple, and the next several are, I think, a little bit more innovative. You're going to have a higher impact. But on the one hand, we'll expand the relatively thin empirical evidence on this question by looking at it in a different setting. But we're also going to develop a method that can be replicated in other settings. Again, to your point, one setting isn't enough, right? You care about the production process, you care about the industry, you care about the product or the service being provided. I don't know what it's stating about this, sorry. Some other areas, though, I think we're going to have bigger, again, back to your same point, we're going to examine the micro mechanisms of the role of communication in the team and channels of effects. And I think that's one of the places where this design, at least to my mind, really shines. We're going to gather a boatload of data on communications between the two individuals and see if we can link that to any impacts on production outcome. And again, it's not going to, by the way, I'm not even going to pretend that we're going to try and answer this question for all firms in all cases everywhere, but we're going to try and start chipping away at this question so we can really understand the mechanisms that can lead to these changes that we do see some empirical evidence of when you change the gender composition or the race composition, probably the socioeconomic class composition as well of employees, the outcomes of the work can change. The other thing we're going to do that I haven't seen any evidence in work at all, at least in the question of diversity, is take a look at the selection effects. Right? This is not really talked about, but in reality, I mean, so far, one way of doing experimental economics is to get groups of people together that have the attributes that you're interested in, or you test various different mechanisms, you test various different characteristics. If you want to take your findings and apply them at least to one particular setting or another, certainly to the labor market, we know that in reality, people select into various different places, and there are different reasons for which they do them as well. Right? So it's not that when you get all these, you get a random sample, even if you get a random sample of men and women from your population, put them together in a team, that's not necessarily going to tell you how they're going to work together in a team when they're working at some particular bank, Bank of America or BlackRock or something like that. Right? So selection matters. So we're going to test the selection effects as well. We're going to take a look at how the social identity of the workplace, the social identity and diversity. I'm just going to start saying diversity. So when I say diversity, I'm talking about race, gender, age, these types of things. How the diversity of the workplace affects the types of workers that want to go. We also want to look at the effect, examine the effects on non-productive downtime, which is not really examined so much. So not only it's, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we're going to look at actual workers hired into a real job. Right? So a lot of the work that I do is in the area of field experiments and natural field experiments. I do lab experiments. I like lab experiments. I also really like trying to figure out how to do things out in the world's the natural occurring field settings. So you can get as much of the natural occurring parameters present in your system. Yes.
Are you taking into account the dynamic aspect of the program? For example, there could be, a static effect in which, again, you increase diversity and increase productivity. If you do the dynamic, perhaps members of some group are more likely to take a lead. I have seen, for example, in an orchestra. In an orchestra, perhaps diversity could, in the static sense, can increase the performance, but in the dynamic, no. So because members of some group are more likely to take a lead for some time, so on. So are you considering that?
No, not explicitly. I do wonder if we have a way of tackling that by looking at the interaction of selection effects with treatment effects, though. So I think I'd like to come back to that question in a little bit, because I think we might be able to shed some light on that question by looking at, so what I'm first going to present is some effects in the work setting, and some effects on selection and getting the different types of workers. And then, I think, let me come back to that question at that point, because I think the interaction may start to address that. but I haven't thought about it yet. So it is. I mean, I thought about it, but not respected. So specifically, what are we doing now? So to narrow down the question even further, what do we want to shed light on? So conditional on joining a firm, does the social identity composition or the diversity of workers in a team affect their joint production outcomes and their individual behaviors within that team? Okay. What relevant outcomes are affected, and what are the mechanisms and mediators to which these occur? And the second one is, how does diversity of a workplace affect the composition of workers drawn to the firm in terms of production characteristics we care about for that firm's product or services? Using speed, output quality, willingness to supply labor, retention, time wasting. How much? When I say time wasting, I'm thinking about the amount of time that you spend having a conversation with somebody instead of being on task and you're actually working. And I'll talk about that again. How we implement that. But again, also labor retention is a big issue too. We think about the cost of hiring and training workers and retaining high quality, right? Is it the case, for example, that a woman who's always working with a man quits sooner because they don't like working with them? Maybe the opposite. They stay longer because they really like working. And also it impacts communication styles. You know, do workplaces that are known to be more diverse, do they attract types of people who have certain types of communication styles? Right? And does this then in turn have an impact on productivity measures? So are certain types of more folks who have more competitive communication styles where they interrupt each other all the time? The stereotype that I'm familiar with, at least in the US, is that men often interrupt each other. Right? Women often don't. It's not always never true, obviously. Right? But so are certain types drawn to workplace, and does that affect the productivity of the team? Okay. I'll get more to that. Okay. So we're going to look at this in the context of gender. We're also going to potentially do it in race, but to just fix ideas and keep the dimensionality relatively constrained, I just want to talk about it in terms of gender today. So for question one, what we're going to ask is, does the gender composition of work teams affect the joint production behaviors? Output quality, production speed, time wasting, labor supply. What are the mechanisms through which this composition occurs? We want to shed light on that. Right? Communication behavior, is it related to that, or is it independent of communication behavior? For example, is it the way that men interact that caused me to really like working with them, or not like working with them? Or is it the fact that it's a man and I don't like working with men for other reasons, for preference reasons that aren't related to communication? Also, how are the impacts affected by communication modality? What I mean here is the communication method, right? So we're going to have an in-person versus a remote setting, right? But the synchronous and asynchronous, does the time dimension affect A, the ways that people communicate, and B, the ways that communicating across social identity difference or in the same social identity group affects the productivity characteristics. Right? And seeing somebody face to face versus instead of just writing. So that I already mentioned this a little bit, but so the setting that I'm going to show you now. So we've designed the setting, we've thought about the setting. It's going to gather a wealth of worker data on production and communication behavior. One drawback in this setting is it doesn't really give the theoretical benefits of diversity a lot of scope to showing. Right? So it's not going to be a complex problem, which is where the empirical literature and and actually the theoretical literature too, suggests that you get more of the benefits of diversity. And I might, if we have time, I'd like to hear any feedback on some possibilities within this framework if I get to do that a little bit better. And then for question 2, we'll just take a look at effects of workplace diversity on selection. Okay, let me get into the meat of what this is. So this design is it's piggybacking on a design of two of my co-authors. So John and Brent have this paper where they take a look. They have a similar type of design, but where it's not working in teams. Right? And so they gather a tremendous amount of data. And what they take a look at is, instead of looking at diversity, they look at the impact of corporate social responsibility on different production behavior. Does it motivate some workers to work more when they know that they are helping a charitable organization? Right? And does knowing that they're going to help, that their work can contribute to the health of charitable organizations draw different types of workers? But that's an assault, they're only individually working. In this context, it's a bit more, well, it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more sophistication required because we're looking at team dynamics, and then we're going to gather a lot of data on communication properly. So we're going to register a real company, right? FHLP Solutions, by FHLP, well, it's Flory, Hickman, List, and Palace. And we create a real data entry job. The plan is to hire somewhere around 400 to 500 workers into this data entry job for a 3-week job that has flexible hours. They're going to be able to choose how many hours to supply to the firm each day. So there are 2 settings. We're going to have a remote work setting where people are doing it online and communicating. They're going to have a video chat, like a Zoom, like we've got now right now, which is between 2 different people. And then and they have a shared spreadsheet that they're entering data in, similar to a Google sheet. Both enter data. We're also going to do it in office or on site, okay? Where we're going to use various different small rooms. So rooms that are about the size of a professor's office. Depends on the professor, but you know, sort of, I guess, about a 10 by 10 office, 10 foot by 10 foot office. I guess 3 meter by 3 meter office, something like that. Where you'll only have one team at a time in that room, but they'll still be interacting. There'll be 2 terminals. They're interacting through this thing. So what's the job task? The job task is that they're going to enter data on Google Street View images. So there's 16 questions, 10 of them relatively easy, 6 more ambiguous, and I'll show you a sample of questions in a second. We're currently building a website to serve as the platform to do the work. We've been working with a web developer for several months now, and I'd say they're around 20% of the way into the building of the website. It's a fairly complicated or sophisticated website. I guess it's more plausible to put it. And so it's not a cheap website. It takes a while to build, but that's why I'm presenting this now to get more feedback on. We still have a lot of dimensions that are open as we're putting this thing together. Okay, so here's some mock-ups of what they will see. So this is the work dashboard. I'm first going to show this in the individual context. What I'll tell you in just a moment is that so workers are first going to work individually for a certain period before they're then put randomly assigned to teams. Yeah.
Just very good question. You mentioned in the beginning that you are doing sort of real world tasks instead of lab-based experiments. Do these kinds of companies exist? Does this type of task exist in like automated?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, that's an excellent question. I guess I don't really have to be honest, I don't know the answer to that in one way. So I mean, the question is to whether or not there are ever 2 teams that are jointly entering data together into a sheet. I don't know. Does anybody know? I'll have to do a little bit more digging, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we do there's joint there is joint effort on documents simultaneously, but whether or not it's the data. And we'll have to think about whether or not that introduces some factors into the estimates or into the results that complicate our interpretations of our calculation. That would be the question. That would be the question. Typically, what I think of when I'm designing field experiments is whether or not the individual is going to think this is weird. Right? And it's a very sort of informal way to put that, because that can influence their behaviors in a variety of different ways. Right? That this isn't the natural path. But so we're going to set it up, and so what does happen is there is independent data entry, and there is aggregation of that data and comparison of that data across individuals to see, for example, to check for quality control. And so the way that we're going to do that, the way that's often done, is by checking the modal response by several different people who are working on something. This was done, for example, in SAT tests for the grading essays. You have several different graders, and then you take the modal grade of that, and then you say, okay, since that one appeared the most, that's what we're going to say is correct. So asynchronously is certainly done. Whether and what we'll do is we'll describe the rationale for them doing it in teams. Right? And what my goal always is to set it up in such a way that it's going to appear natural or seem natural. At first, I use my own intuition to do that, and then we field test to see and to try to make sure whether or not people actually feel it's a natural setting. But it's still a good question, how representative? And that's going to come up when I talk about, I didn't talk about it today, but all team, the length of teams as well, and how we're going to try and map that.
So do you think it matters that people know that this is going to be a 3-week show? Because this may be go to your previous question, because it's not the same if I know it's going to be like that, or if I know. So all these issues around reputation and how to treat people are quite relevant, I would think, but I don't know.
No, absolutely, no, I agree. So there are 2 ways to think about that. I do think, yes, obviously. I mean, there's nothing to say that, right? I think it should matter. And I think that's one of the, and I'm going to talk about that hopefully towards the end if I have a little bit of time, but one of the more obvious questions to ask about this is the duration, right? So one answer to that would be, we're just going to look at it as one setting, and we're going to say we know it might change when you're talking about teams of higher duration. Right? That said, I've actually talked about this personally. So I myself, think about my own history. So I myself have been engaged in work, certainly when I was in college. It lasted 3 weeks or 5 weeks. One summer I did a 4-week, 12-hour a day, 7 days a week job, which is nuts. But one summer in Minnesota, it was a short-term job. Do I think any of my interactions with that person and with other people in the workplace affected my productivity? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very anecdotal and an observation. The way that we're going to try and look at it, or the way that I've been thinking about how we can look at it, is by looking at duration effects, either within a 30-minute session, which is really small, or across sessions with the same team. Right? What we can do is, as we're randomly combining teams, we can make sure or set up the randomization such that certain teams are repeated several times. Right? So we'll have a subset, a randomization subset that meet more times. Also, towards the end, we can think about different ways of extending it. We can hire a subset of workers for a longer period of time. And we can ask them questions, we can think about ways that we could encourage them to think they're going to continue working with people. So some anticipatory. So I definitely thought about it, and I don't know if my ways to address it are convincing yet. That's next question. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you said it before. In the original pool that you required like 400 people, is there any criteria? Is to be college educated people? I don't know.
The criteria such as what? Like
certification or
not necessarily. We might block randomized by criteria. But
the original kind.
Yeah, I'll explain the hiring in just a second. I think it's really in 2 slides. Okay. Again, it's the first time I'm presenting it, so I don't remember where all the slides are, but I think it'll be clear. So this is a picture of the image. This is that they'll see. Again, this is when they're working alone, not with a teammate yet. But so, and then they answer. So this is the top of the screen, and then the bottom of the screen, a lot of questions. We're going to actually cut these. We're going to edit these down. But the quality of the streets visible in the picture is. And then there's a Likert scale. How many potholes are visible in the picture? They count the number of potholes. There are 1 or more houses for sale signs visible. They count those. Right? But so there are there are about 10 questions that are simple and numerical exercise. You're just counting them. You're either paying attention to counting them accurately or not, counting them quickly or not. And then there are others that require more judgment. There's 6 of those for which the accuracy rates in the past paper that we're borrowing this design, or this part of the design, from the accuracy rates are between 45% and 85%, 89%. So the accuracy rates on the other ones, easier ones, are almost all above 95%. Okay. Here we go. Now, yes. Okay. So what are we going to do? So we're going to post ads on internet job boards, and then we're going to sample randomly. So we're going to sample randomly from those who apply. In this case, equal number of men and women. We can also log on race, but I don't want to get into that now because it has all sorts of implications for sample sizes. Or we could even just ex post analyze that, assuming that the race is orthogonal, because we're randomly putting these teams together. But we could also choose other things. We could choose like high school education versus college education too. So we could also block randomized. But right now in the simplest version, we're just going to randomly sample from class. And then we'll gather some observable characteristics on their education and other things at age. So we're going to have 4 hiring stage treatments with a 2-part application procedure that I developed in an earlier paper with John and Andreas Lebrand. And I think I'll describe that process later at the time. But so for remote work, ads are going to be posted on the job boards in about 15 major cities, roughly, around the US to get a good geographic distribution. For the in-office work, the ads will be posted in and around Chicago and possibly also Boston. Right? This is where the sites are that we can set up an in-office work setting. So the work stage, what's the work stage going to look like? So workers can choose how much to work each day from 0 up to 12 hours between 8 a.m. US Eastern Time and 5 p.m. US Pacific Time by logging in and logging out of the system. There's going to be an onboarding period of about probably 2 hours. So workers are going to first have to complete a paid 1 to 2 hour training session, a training video. And then they're also going to have to complete at least 3 hours, we're thinking about the numbers here, but 3 hours of the main work task by themselves. Right? This is going to be important to get some measures of individual ability, right? From unobserved characteristics. Right? So we'll essentially be able to have the average ability on a variety of outcome variables of all the individuals. Then the main work period will occur, during which folks will, or the workers will alternate between solo work periods as well as team work periods. Is there any way to make this kind of disappear?
Just click on mess and then at the bottom right.
Oh, mess. Gotcha.
And then third panel. No.
Oh, that's the most one. So it's not the most one. Okay. Let's do that. Okay. So, right. And we might also do a coworker feedback session. So this I probably won't have time to get this today, but this may help us dig into some of the feedback, or sorry, some of the channels that's actually causing the effect that we're seeing, because we're going to cut off different types of different potential drivers to see whether the effects remain, whether they get bigger or small. Okay. Now in the team session, how the team session is going to work, we got 2 workers. So 2 workers are going to be randomly paired together to enter data jointly on a shared spreadsheet that's integrated into this work platform. And we're embedding this video chat screen. That's by the way a criteria. People will need to be able to have reliable interconnection and a video, the ability to essentially consume other types of audio video. So that'll be in the upper right corner of the web page so the workers can communicate. Team sessions will last about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, but so they will have 15 images, which takes about 20 minutes on average to process based on the findings in the prior paper. Use the similar sort of design. Either worker can enter data into this shared spreadsheet. The team will move to the new image only after both workers click submit. But notice that a person could do nothing else before they click submit. We will also be able to record what they're doing. At least, to know whether their keypad or mouse is active, right? And we'll be able to match this up whether or not words are spoken. Record the conversation. Yeah.
Is output additive of the 2 workers, or is it multiplicative? Is it team production, or is it a sum of individual productions?
So it's at the team level, right? So and I'm not sure if that answers your question or not. So
Does output of one individual affect the output of the other, or are outputs independent?
they're not independent because it's a joint production. it's going to depend on the inputs of the two individuals. Now, what the directionality of that is, I don't have any sense of yet.
But it's not that we can say, okay, we have 15 images to processes, let's split like 8, I do 8.
Right,
7.
absolutely.
That can be done.
No, that cannot be done. That cannot be done.
They have to be there.
They have to interact. At the very least that one worker has to do is click submit at the end, or the team got it. In likelihood, it's going to be likely that both people are talking and entering. There's an extension that I won't get to talk about today that will allow them to potentially divide up, well, they can certainly divide up questions within a particular image that they're processing. And we're going to look at something else where we incentivize the portion of the questions that have more judgment. We'll take a look at that too, but I probably shouldn't bring that up because I don't want to talk about it.
I guess that maybe one thing. So you can have like your own spice in this situation. So you send me and in a true teamwork and you say, okay, you have to do this, you have to be lazy. Okay. And then because laziness is going to arise probably as an outcome, but you cannot control whether that happens or not. You can randomize that if you send people and you can say, okay, now I'm going to say lazy men and lazy women to interact with men or women. And I think in that way, I understand that you want things to happen endogenously because that's probably what's going to be the case. But this is like a great setting to force crowd.
Absolutely. No, that's a good point. If we could also do that by communication style too.
Yeah, I mean,
So a word we often use is confederates, right? Like, right?
You can do whatever you can, so don't worry. And the other, you don't say that.
Say that again. What?
You take one and say, do whatever you can. Don't worry about it. And the other guy says, you have to finish this work.
That's right. That's right. We can find, yeah, right. There are ways to nudge, or nudge the behavior one direction or another, to make it be more, I suppose, natural feeling, right? For lack of a better adjective.
I know everything is random, but by chance you can get 500 people that are really nice.
Yes. Yeah, but no, that's right. So we kind of think of having actual confederates that behave in a particular way, that we train them to behave, right? Or we could try and encourage the actual hired workers to behave as well. Yeah, and as long as the effect on that behavior is high enough, it's true. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Okay, now the longer list of behaviors, it's actually shorter for production than it is for communication. So let's see, how many minutes do I have left here? Sorry. What is it? Till 12:30. Excellent. Okay, perfect. Then things are not going so. Okay, is that right? Okay, perfect. Okay. So okay. So for the outcome measures, so right now, so this is just I don't know why. Oh yeah, speed. Okay, so yeah, so we get. So I'm just using Y superscript P to indicate the response variables for production type behaviors. We've got speed. So this would be measured at the worker. Well, okay, it depends whether it's the worker image or the worker data level. But so speed will be measured. It can be measured at the individual and image level, right? When they're working individually in the solo units, right? The number of images is going to be the number of images processed per minute, or the inverse of the time spent on an image. Accuracy, again, this observation will be at the individual image level. This is the proportion of fields correctly coded for a given image. Now, we don't know all the correct answers, but again, the way that we're going to identify what the correct answer is we're going to use the modal response from a group of about 20 different workers processing each image. So each image will be processed about 20 times. Downtime, wasting time, is going to be defined as the following. It's going to be also at the individual image level, and it's going to be the amount of time spent between processing images. The time resting on that main screen or that dashboard that showed you, I didn't really just explain it too much, but it was showing you it shows the worker the list of images still to do and the list of images already done. In addition to that, and so this is either resting on that home screen before starting the teeth image, or navigating away from the web page. We will be able to tell that as well. So if they go to a different web page, if they go to a different tab, right, and their screen, and they're just looking at the news, for example, because they don't want to work right now, right? We'll be able to tell them that as well. We will have a constraint that, and we still need to decide the time length. They need to be active on the website for X number of seconds before being logged out, whether it's 90 seconds or 20 seconds. We still need to think about that, so that somebody can't just log in and stay logged in and make a ton of money, and then do nothing. Right? So they will have to actually be active on the page. But they could switch over, read the news, switch back, do a couple things, switch over, read the news, things like that. Or they could just be chatting in the team situation. They could be chatting with a coworker, which I think is actually really interesting to mention. I'll talk about in a moment. When we think about the potential costs and benefits of two different workers of different social identity interacting with each other, if there are any costs, there could very well be a not reciprocal, but a symmetric or a benefit in the direction. Labor supply, we're also going to look at this in the individual day level. So this is the number of hours worked in a given day. Right now, our plan is to cap it at 3 weeks, so it would have to be less than 15. And then quitting, which is, I guess, similar, actually. But so we could take a look at when a worker stops working permanently, either gives notification or simply never logs in again. We'll think about, maybe we'll make both of the options. And partly the motivation for that is in my discussion with so many practitioners, so many different corporate executives in companies that are working on this question, either in human resources departments or in what's now become a mainstay. It's quickly becoming a mainstay in corporate America, the chief diversity officer. They think a lot about retention of different groups of people, right? Whether or not employees are quitting at higher rates in certain demographic groups, and whether or not they're losing talent or losing skills from as a result. And so this is a little bit more motivated by what I keep hearing when I'm talking about these practitioners. Yeah, you have a question.
So the randomness of doing it individually or team, is that daily? So do I know every day if with anticipation if I'm going to work alone, or just you draw it in the first day and then you always work in groups, or you always don't?
Yeah, it's not daily. It's always alternating. So every day involves alternating between spending some time working on solo and spending some time working in teams.
Okay.
Part of that, not the only reason, but part of that is a logistical constraint because we don't know how long the teams are going to be working for, right? Some will be 20 minutes because the time length is defined by the number of images they're actually finishing. So some might work 20 minutes, others might work 15, others might work 30. And so we don't want individuals sitting there just waiting for a team and not working. So that's part of the reason. Yeah. Another reason, though, sorry. Another reason is another set of hypotheses that I started thinking about, which is whether or not experiences in prior teams affects later production behavior. So if I've whether it's I hate men and I've worked with a bunch of men recently, so now I'm working a lot more slowly, or it's I like a competitive communication style, but the last team was just so collaborative. We just kept taking turns speaking, and that really made me, lowered my productivity. And so now I'm going to work a lot slower. So that's another reason. But you have another question.
No, I don't know. Related to that is, so you say I can log in at any point in time to work, but how is the team pairing going to work in that situation? Because if I don't work from 10 to 11, everybody doesn't work from 10 to 11. How are you going to form the teams?
Yeah, so I guess it'll be conditional on who's logged in and who's available in a queue. So what we're imagining is that initially, the very first person will log in and have to work solo. Now, I don't know if we want the second person to then make a team, right? Because there may be some correlation between the timing of when they log in or not. So we might want to wait a certain number of minutes after the first person logs in, that we start randomly combining people, or a certain number of people. If we get at least 10 people on the website, for example, then we'll start randomly putting people in.
I don't know how people that takes the type of shops work, but it seems that the shop offers a lot of freedom. But if people really take that freedom, you may not be able to assign the treatments that you want to assign because you don't have enough pool of people.
Right.
If only women work in the morning and only men work in the afternoon, so maybe to try to set up a time frame to work.
Yeah.
To save you some troubles.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
Because 500 is not such a big number that you can have all these combinations. I think that might be a potential issue.
Yeah, I'll have to think. I can't remember the average number of hours worked the last time that when they used this in the solo case per individual. I think it was on the order of 3 to 4. But it's right, because there can be some people who are on the lower end of the distribution. And that might be a question of costs. Two ways to think about that is the number of people we hire, in addition to the number, also the wage that we pay. The wage will also be a selection characteristics as well, but I'm not sure if that would be that much. But yeah, I think that's a good point.
Because you may end up having like self-selection in certain type of times.
Yeah,
that is going to affect the results.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
I'm going to ask information about their preferences, if they prefer to work or the team or they prefer like diversity or if they are.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. No, but that's a good idea.
I don't know how to set up this questionnaire, but maybe we have know if people care about diversity or not,
Or say, or they care and see what they do.
yeah.
Well, we're going to, for diversity,
Maybe you can set a group, I don't know if you can, but then the people can select, like, okay, I would like to work with people that is not from Rosario, Rosario, the other guy from Rosario, and then, no, again,
yeah.
because this is what sorry, but when people meaning, maybe you want to compare a setup where people can choose to do whatever they want. Because at the end of the day, the policy implications have to be the policy that encourages diversity. So
Right.
if you extraordinarily put people in different groups, you are not representing.
Well, it depends. I agree. I think I see what you're saying. There is, yeah. I mean, well, here, so there's some control that we have over that, and some that we don't as workers, right? And then it depends on the job, depends on the career. As academics, we have a tremendous amount, right? But when you move into other firms, a lot of the very high-paying jobs, you're often told by your boss to work on a team, right?
Yeah.
But there is a stage at which selection occurs, and that is whether or not you're going to move into that job, right? And given what you know about the firm, what you know about the job. And so I can't answer that in a limited way, and we are going to try and address that, and that's in how we describe the firm. And we'll get to that in a couple more slides. Yeah, but no, this is some good ideas. Yeah. Okay. All right, communication behaviors. There's a laundry list here. I don't want to go through the acronyms. What I want to do with this slide is give an indication of the types of communication behaviors that we're planning to take a look at. And we still need to dig into the literature and potentially add one more person to the team that has more depth and expertise on the different types of communication dynamics in the social psych literature or the behavior literature. who's actually more, I'll be honest, I'll admit up front, I'm not an expert on the communication. I'm very interested. I'm interested in how it affects productivity and production. And how it changes across diversity and how other. But so, for example, we might think about participation rate, the quantity of words spoken per minute during a joint session. That's one type of communication we could define. Dominance rate could be the fraction of total words spoken during a joint session by a particular person. If they're dominating the conversation, if they're highly dominant, from a 90% talker or from a 10% talker. Back and forth rate, the quantity of speaker switches. We could talk about this as turn taking, but we could also think about this as an interruption rate as well. This is when the speaker, we would define as something along the lines of the speaker switches, but without a pause greater than a tenth of a second. So we can tell whether people are interrupting each other. By the way, how can we tell this? We can tell this because we'll be recording these conversations and we're going to run it through speech to text transcription software, which actually tells you what people said. But then they tell you the source from which it was said. So you know which of the individuals is doing the speaking. And they also have timestamps, so you can tell how long people were talking for. So we in theory, we haven't done it yet, but in principle, we should be able to differentiate between two people who are having a back and forth that is more collaborative. Well, that involves pausing and listening and then repeating back, or a back and forth that is cutting each other off. Okay? No, one person might find one good, another might find the other. It's what we can differentiate. Yeah.
It seems that some of those are going to be quite different depending on whether you are online or you are in person, right? Because sometimes the back and forth Zoom doesn't work, and you have to wait because you can kill the other guy. So,
Where they're frozen.
yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that'll be interesting to think about in terms of what's driving changes we see across communication mode or communication modality. Yeah, that's a good point.
Or what is that amount of time that you consider pause in the conversation is it has to be different. It's live, but like in person,
Yes.
and it's on Zoom.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Just gonna write that down. And Zoom notes.
It's like not only the outcome will be different, but the threshold you have to test are probably different because of the type of interaction.
Absolutely. Okay, great. That's a good point. Okay. We're also going to take a look at text-based sentiment analysis measures using natural language processing software. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but so as I understand, you can divide using the words that folks use. You can divide the types of words that people are using into aggressive, non-aggressive, engaged, and non-engaged. And it might even advance further by the time we actually get this in the field. Some more classifications of the types of ways that people are talking. Now you might say, I don't believe in any of this stuff. So we'll have to take a look and see what really the evidence is of these different styles of communication. We'll also look to see if these actually have any effects on either on production outcomes, production behaviors, or other communication outcomes too. Correlations there. But, we'll also do this audio-based sentiment analysis, which is much different. So this is based on a study that we found and has been used several times since, where, I don't know if I'll describe it here, but so snippets of the conversation are recorded. Well, so we'll have the entire conversation, video and audio recorded. It's going to give a boatload of data. The question is what to do with that data. One of the things that we're going to do with that data is, so you can take the audio recording and you can eliminate sounds of high frequency. And by frequency, I mean the actual sound. So T's and S's, consonants, have a higher frequency. And you can eliminate that from the audio form. So the individuals cannot know the information content of what's being exchanged. but they can perceive the emotional tone. Right? And so this has been used and replicated several times to show that you can classify, or it has been classified, into these 5 different types of warmth, professionalism, anxiety, dominance, and hostility. Okay? And so one canonical example, if you think about some of the stereotypes that might be out there, maybe males are more hostile, maybe they're more dominant, maybe not, but maybe women are more warm than that. You can think about it, and it depends on the major kind of the gender of who they're. You're going to take a look at that. So, yeah.
Almost these people, you know,
The people who are classifying this.
you tell people you will all these. I don't know.
No. So this is
only the record. I never find.
well. So no, yeah. Some of it. Yeah, so let me. Yes, they have to. They have to.
Yeah.
But the salient is
Not that.
no, not that a little bit. And so the way that we'll probably phrase it in a truthful way that makes it sound like it's something innocuous we're doing as quality control, that they will, just some little thing at the bottom of a. I mean, basically all the legal forms that most of us sign all the time, except maybe when we're buying a house. And even then it just starts, just sign and sign and sign. We have to tell. Yeah, right. But we'll try and set it up in such a way that we expect the salience of it to not persist as they're continuing.
Sorry, I have a more general question. Do these people know that these jobs that they are hired working are actually useless and they're just used for an experiment?
No, it's a good question. And
Because I understand that would be a very different environment.
Yeah.
I mean, they believe that these things, that looking at images in Google Maps, actually serve for something.
right, yes. And
And isn't that the problem? I mean, can you do that?
yeah, we don't like
Because you are
no.
inventing, as I understand, you're inventing a company and registering them. But just the only objective of that is to do this experiment.
That's the main
So you're not
objective.
using anything real for
Maybe not. So this is
But that's a different, because if the employees realize that their behavior will be probably very different than if they think that they are working for a company that actually produces something useful. I mean,
Absolutely, I agree 100%. And so that's the nail on the head of one of the differences between trying to set up a natural field experiment and doing something lab, whether or not that happens. And I agree with you. I think that happens. It can have a big impact on people. And so to answer your question, the first time that this was done, on the individual case, the images were used. They were actually being used for something. So we're going to endeavor to do the same thing because we don't. It's a norm in field experiments that we don't lie to our experiments. Not everybody follows that, right? But it's one that I don't think I've ever violated. Say ever because that's something to find something. But so we never knowingly violate. And so if we cannot find a productive use for this, right? I suppose what we would do is we still try to use language. So there's some wiggle room here that because to describe it in such a way that it's not salient, that it's not going to be used. But so let me just without getting into the ethics and the mechanics and the logistics of it, let me say that our full intention is to set it up as a natural field experiment where it's a genuine job. We're registering. We have an actual website and we pay people to do work that is actually productive. That's what we're going to do. And I'm not really sure it's going to be that hard to do that. It just requires some creativity. Who needs it for what? And we may need to change some.
because my doubt is how generalized will this kind of results that you will obtain are to actual jobs.
Yeah,
I mean, these things that you're doing are supposed to be useful to predict something related to actual jobs, banks or in parks or whatever.
Yeah.
But this kind of pattern that you have invented, I don't know if the results that you get there will be useful to generalize to others.
Yeah, I mean, that's always about.
Other areas.
Yeah, no, that's all.
Perhaps it's a very sorry about my question.
No.
It's a bit pessimistic in the sense that I don't know if doing things like that are really worth it.
Right, no, sorry, there's a couple of questions that came up there, so one.
I mean, because we're going to spend a lot of money. I mean, in comparison to the average research that we do at the university, versus, I don't know, billions of dollars probably.
At least $1 million. Probably.
Yeah, so,
Yeah. No, but so let me answer that in a couple different ways. So yeah, and so the first question, first most important one, is let's assume for the sake of time that I've convinced you we're going to do this in a natural fashion. It is real work, it's actually useful. We can talk much about how I'm going to hopefully be able to do that. I have a 98% degree based on how I
When you can argue that the work is useful, even if it's an experiment to gather information. So if you consider that the information is potentially useful, what they're doing is useful, even if you throw away the images after work is done.
Right. Yeah, and so that would be our fail safe. Absolutely. There's a way you can describe it so that people don't believe that they're in an experiment. They think they're in a real data entry job. The follow-up question though is how representative of this of the workplace is this? That's a great question. And again, I just started thinking about this as a good criticism, but I thought about my own work history. I've done a lot of different jobs, but whether it's mowing lawns, selling concessions, or doing data entry. And I have done stints of 4 to 5 weeks of data entry jobs. But again, I'm an observation report. And so we need to actually see like how common is short-term data entry jobs. If you're working for Manpower, some temporary agency or something like that. Right? So that's a good question. Another question is whether data entry matters for the other areas that we care about for diversity and inclusion. Right? So these are all really important questions, and I think that's why the mechanism we're thinking about what we're going to do here is get as close as we can, or shine the first light on the connection with communication variables, communication styles, right? And then it may be there are other parameters, other variables in that workplace setting that even if you take those genders and communication styles for a different industry, you won't replicate. It's possible. But I would argue that you increase the probability that because you're changing fewer parameters. You're able to see more of what's happening. It's not just the gender, but it's the gender and the communication. It's the gender and the communication variable and the communication modality. Right? And so by taking a look at the different pieces of this that cause the effect, we'll be able to generate evidence and data that is more likely to be transportable across other settings. So that's how I'm going to start.
Thank you.
And it's a very good question. It's one that we always think about in terms of field experiment. In terms of external validity, right? Can you take it out? Can you generalize the results to other settings we care about? Another way to talk about it would be talking about estimating structural parameters in the structural model, but I don't want to go down that road with the last 10 minutes that we have. It's something we may do with the paper, but I'm keeping this not with a well-defined theoretical model. We've also got there could also be some derived measures about competitiveness. Okay. I think this is the point where I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to switch to a different set of slides. Because I have I'm curious. So this is because I was thinking about this a lot. So an unnamed coworker, co-author, and I think we have some disagreement here. We haven't talked it out yet, so I'm not going to name the person. But so this is the original way that this co-author, I'm going to use gender pronouns because I would give away maybe it would not, but it would narrow the possibility. So this is how they were thinking about the specification. That we would be able to look at this, all these regressions at the individual level. And the individual image level, where we would request, that P could be speed, for example, speed, how long it's taking to process a given image. We have one long regression where we've got the We've got the male, so we've got an indicator for the gender of the individual. No, sorry. So in the individual setting, all of these would be zero. All these terms would be zero. When they're working in solo work, but when they're working with their teammates, there would be a lot of these that are non-zero. This would be a dummy for a male teammate, a dummy for a female teammate. This would be gender interaction with the individual working times the gender or with the gender of their teammate. And then some characteristics of their teammate. Now, I'm not sure we can really do this, right? So because what we're going to have here is we're not going to have individual level observations when they're working in a team. They're going to be team level observations. And so I kept thinking about whether we can do this, and I have to admit, again, this is preliminary work we're working on. I don't think this specification works. Anybody in the room have a
So the outcome is by shot, right? So you complete the 15 questions, no matter whether that's a team or solo. That's the outcome.
right?
So if that's the case, then you first have a dummy that is solo or not. And then the not part has an interaction between whether they are both sexes or not, or three categories, but men and men, women and women, or women and men.
I guess what I'm wondering is, aren't we double counting data points here? If we take it,
Can you go back to the definition of the output variables?
Yeah.
Because these were like different things.
I understand MJT,
you mimic the this.
MJT, like if you're high, like your teammate is male. And so I don't know what is B3.
So right here. So this is if you are female and you're female.
No, because my question was, in order to answer your question, if it is possible to do that regression, it's good to have a look at the definition of the variables, because maybe for some variables it's possible to rank, and for some others it's not.
I agree. So I think
So for example, speed may be something that you can do with accuracy, maybe it's a joint.
I guess what I'm saying here is the speed is going to be a team level variable.
Yeah, maybe depending on how you measure it. So, or maybe you may use the same observation. You may analyze it individually for one person and using the different teams that he or she participated, compare it with the observations of another person who participated in different teams.
Yes.
Like that.
Yes, we can do that. I think my concern with taking this approach is just that I think it's a
Number of
misspecification.
hours worked is a perfect individual.
Right.
That's what you use.
I don't think
Within is also individual.
because it depends on the interaction. Right. Yeah, you will start talking about.
No, but the question was if it is possible to measure those variables individually, or if they are necessarily measured as a joint thing. And some of them are also need to be measured individually, and some others maybe
I
not.
don't think speed can be measured individually because they
No,
don't
that is true.
I think so. Good. Somebody disagrees. Because it's inherently defined as the rate at which that joint product of two people is being produced. And so it can't be individual. There are some individual level variables that I could do, which is whether or not somebody free rides. That would be individual, right? Or whether or not somebody dominates the team. We figure out how to do that too. But at the when it comes to speed and accuracy, I think based on your conversation, I'm going to go with my gut. And I think this is science in action, right? This is me just being forthright. This is early days with this experiment. I think the more appropriate, in full disclosure, I was just thinking about this last time, so the question doesn't make sense. And so I think this is the best way to actually do it. Let's see if I can make sure I'm sharing my screen.
I think you have to share a different PowerPoint window. We share only
Am I no longer sharing?
No, that is not only just, so stop sharing.
Stop it, okay.
Yeah. No, that is the hard compartment. And then share again.
And then just share pantalla.
Oh, yeah, that would be.
Okay.
Okay.
So, here. So,
But can I add something? So, like, in terms of the speed, so maybe you can control that too, because you can tell, so what is the difference in the team interaction? Here, me, we can be working, and then I ask you, in question number 2, what did you put? Is this 12 sales signs, as you mentioned, is it 11? How should we put it? Or you can say, okay, we work as a team, but we don't interact in that way. It's like we have to do the 15 by our own, and then, okay, we can be interacting, but it's not, so maybe there is a way to force it. And
How many times the guy plays in different teams? Important, if you want to, there is a fixed effect. Maybe the individual.
Yeah.
You will get individual speed or accuracy, like putting the people in different teams and getting the fixed effect.
yes. Here, let me see if I can answer that question satisfactorily with this. Let me first say, yes, they actually do think, I see your point, that we could structure it such that 2 teams that are acting, we could make it so they don't have to both submit. And they're actually just individually doing it, but talking with each other. And then it would make sense to measure individual speed. The way that I've set it up right now, the way that we're planning to set it up, such that it has to be a joint product, because at least by virtue of the fact that they each have to press submit, then it has to be a joint regression, I think. And so let me go with that for now, given that our 2 remaining minutes, and I think I'm going to come to the question about treatment next here. So, what I'm thinking about it is this way. So we've got these production variables. So P can be speed, it can be accuracy, it can be downtime, right? So the admitted team is a male-female team in this case. MM is a dummy for integrated variable for male-male, FF for female-female. XK is a vector sum team observables, for example, mean age and education. But the problem is there's unobservables that could be correlated with gender, right? And so what I'm thinking here is that we're going to add this this piece right here, this theta hat k bar. What is that? This is the mean of the 2 workers' average values for for their speed, for example, or their accuracy from their solo work. So we'll get some unobserved drivers. This is going to capture unobserved drivers of the individual ability or type that could be correlated with gender. We could try to have specifications too. It could be the minimum or the maximum. The average is just the way I was thinking about it in this case. Yeah.
So computing is estimating production function. Well, I don't see why it would be right to impose that restriction that the mean is what matters. You don't need to. Again, it's like you have a labor, capital, and you are estimating the production function. Then, of course, you can also estimate individual performance or any individual variable, like you can look at the relationship between the wage, individual, and similar. But for me, that's my impression. Okay, you are estimating the production function, in which gender matters, it matters whether both are male or one is male, the other female. It matters if one has more education, the other less. But I don't see why you would like to impose that restriction on the other.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that education and age and those others are reliably sufficient to pick up on the skill combination. So what I'm concerned about is the biases that might occur in this beta 1, this beta 2, beta 1 and beta 2, that when you switch from a male-female team to a male-male team, maybe if there's some systematic difference in the skill level, say that all, for whatever reason, all the male data entrants are stupid and all the female data entrants are just amazing, right? So is it, I mean, I want to make sure that when I switch from the male female to the male male and it goes way down, that what I'm picking up on is something about two men interacting, not about the fact that they're down. Because and so that's what I'm trying to do with this variable right here. I can get information for how good they are with respect to that output variable from the solo sessions. I could call it a regression, but it's simply the mean of their. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's the mean of how they do. Right? And so I want to incorporate that into, because what I'm worried about is otherwise there's going to be some homogeneity here between the male team. There might be, there might not be, but there might be. And between having a male team and what the skill composition, the unobserved part of the skill composition.
Why don't you use separately, like the two averages of the two persons? Why do you use, like, why would you use mean or min max? Why don't you use like separately? I don't know, bad workers, when they interact with a female, they do that, and when they interact with.
So you're suggesting if I put in
Keep the
theta sub I,
yeah, exactly.
theta sub K1 and theta sub K2.
Or even fixed effects of like individual I and J within when they're there.
Something that seems, I can't put my finger on it at the moment. It seems to comment a bit dicey about that.
If you have many observations.
I think that in a way, so what this whole discussion, I think shows, is that it's not obvious what do you want to measure, and it depends on the specific. I know that it seems that you're narrowing down by saying speed, but the speed in this context can have different dimensions. So it might be different the regression that you want to do for the same left-hand side variable in order to address different kind of things. So one that I was thinking, for instance, is that, okay, the team is one production, but then I can go back to individuals and measure the difference between my team production and my individual production.
Yes.
And see whether that's different and how is that related
Yes.
to being in a particular type of team.
Yes.
But it's a different question, right? Because it's if my individual performance increases by working in a team with the men or the women, or if the team production overall, which maybe is the company, the company's goal, is higher or lower. So it depends on how you see which dimension of the question you want to answer. Maybe you need a specification that's different.
Yeah, possibly.
I think this paper is going to have a ton of tables in there.
Or it's going to be, or it's going to be several different papers too. Yeah. And so, I agree. I agree with that characterization. But so, let's say, I mean, is there let me make this a little bit more concrete. Do you see a problem with this specification where, so say we're looking at, we set P equal to, speed or accuracy, right? So the interpretation here of beta 2 would be switching from a male-female team to a female-female team. What is the impact of that, or in beta 1 similarly? What's the impact of that on the speed of the team, right? Maybe this isn't needed here. I don't know. I feel like it is, but so maybe that term isn't needed there at all. But so the working hypothesis, if there's communication frictions across men and women, or blacks and whites, or people from different provinces in Buenos Aires, or what have you, right? Then you would expect that beta 1 has to be greater than 0, beta 2 has to be greater than 0. You get the same social identity working together, they're going to work faster, and they're going to be more accurate. That's the implication of the first two papers that I mentioned, the Zier and the Lang paper. It's about the theoretical implications of diversity in groups, right? And then, and so same gender, does it actually increase? Simple question, right? Does speed increase? Does accuracy increase? Now, what I find interesting, or what at least I find interesting about this, is that because we're incorporating non-productive downtime as well, it could very well be that when you get two people in the same social group together, they're more likely to chat about sports, chat about politics, chat about their wives, their husbands, their weather, who knows what, right? So their non-productive downtime may also increase, right? And this is something that hasn't really been talked about in this context, right? And so you've got these countervailing tendencies. And so if you, oh shoot, okay. So let me wrap up. So we could do this, the whole sort of analysis again for communication behaviors. To look at the different types of how the gender composition of the team affects the team's communication behaviors. And then we can look at what I'm currently calling correlations between production outcomes and the communication behaviors. And the question is whether or not there can be more than correlation. Are there ways that we can randomly assign that? There's some great ideas posted about that. Adding some confederates who behave in a certain way, for example, or encouraging people to behave in a certain way, for example. I'm not going to talk about the time trends. I already talked about that a little bit, about how we could see if having a team exist for a longer period of time reduces a potential friction, right, or creates a potential benefit. Right? We could look at that over the course of a 30-minute period, over the number of images, or over different sessions. So we have the same team reassembled on different days. Because that question was raised too, like the duration of a team, and encourage people with the notion that they might do. The only other, Lord. So, and then I was talking about, what I didn't get to was communication behaviors. And switching between Zoom versus in person versus asynchronous, where you're communicating in an asynchronous fashion like email. And I didn't get a chance to talk at all about impacts outside the team or selection. What I'll do with the selection is just show you these two graphs. And then, the long and the short of it is to take a look at the distribution, the CDS, so we can empirically estimate the distribution of types. And they're essentially the fixed effects, right? The individual fixed effect, or the for speed or for accuracy. And so what we can do is we can actually plot, right, a cumulative distribution function to get and estimate what that would be from our sample, right? Based on, so we have a diversity version of the statement. We're an incredibly diverse firm. I don't have time to tell you the actual, to show you the script that I've used in studies. It works pretty well. I'm getting a diverse selection of candidates of underrepresented groups to come. But it works to get underrepresented groups to come. But does it work to change? What does it do to the composition of the speeds that you bring in? What does it do to the composition of the accuracies you bring in? Right? You know, and so this is the CDF. You can think of it as a PDF too, and just think about whether or not you're shifting that PDF to the right, whether you're shifting it to the left, whether you're shifting parts of it up or down. And that's the notion behind this graph. But I'm going to stop now. I've kept you over 10 minutes. Thank you so much for feedback and for entertaining my long-windedness as I present this for the first time. So you can tell we've got a lot of different pieces to think through, but you got me to give me some comments. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, on Zoom. Thank you so much. Good to see you.